gunpowder, and you would pour it and push it in with the bullet in. Pull rammer. You now had to pull out the ramrod. This becomes an essential piece of your weapon. Everything has to be pushed down. So if you lost this, if in the heat of battle you got excited and you bent it, or you snapped it, your rifle was now useless. You could not fire it anymore. A lot of soldiers in the heat of battle would throw the ramrod down or try to jam it in the ground so they could grab it, and if they bent it, that was the end of it. You would now ram and push everything down. Retrieve ramrod. This is where you were supposed to now put it back so you were ready for the next round. This is where a lot of soldiers would try to save time and just shove it in the ground. You would now be given the last three commands. First of all, four. Prime. You now had to pull your rifle up, pull the hammer back to safety, and grab what's called a percussion cap out of your ammunition pouch. In order to fire this rifle, I have to create a spark. This little percussion cap is going to create the spark. By the way, this did happen in battle. If you dropped it, you had to go find another one or grab one out of here. You would now be given the last three commands: ready, aim, and fire. And ready, you would pull the hammer all the way back. The hammer is going to strike the mercury, creating the spark to ignite the gunpowder. Aim, and fire.
Oh, shit!
That is, by the way, your one shot. In order to fire a second shot, you have to reproduce all 9 steps.
Encore, do it again.
Guys, listen up. This young man had a wonderful reaction. Now think about having to reload your gun while someone over there is making the same sound in your direction.
Keep in mind.
Think about the nerves and the courage that it would take to reload and try to get a next shot off. Someone's making that sound, and
keep in mind, I'm doing this at a very, very slow, relaxed pace. In battle, while you're doing this here, the other side's doing the same thing. And if you're in the front row, guess who they're shooting at first?
That's a shot.
And there's, as you can see, most of your battles are actually fought on open field. There's no cover. This is why, again, imagine the cover. At the battle of Pickett's charge on the third day of Gettysburg, the Confederates had to cross over a mile wide open field while the Union Army is shooting directly out. It's also why when you see movies like Glory or Gettysburg, you will notice the soldiers are not firing as they move. The reason is, if you're attacking, if you're the one charging, it's very hard to do what I just did while you're moving. Most soldiers would load up while they were stationary, and then if you had to charge your opponent, you would run as far as you could before you fired. Because once you fired, now you're empty and you've got to stop and try to do that all over again. This type of warfare would actually favor the defender. If you're standing still defending and my army is attacking you, you have the advantage because you can reload a lot faster than I can.
But being on high ground was something that all the generals wanted to be on. High ground. They called it the good ground.
The other thing is, if you'll notice, I won't pass you, I've only fired about 6 rounds. Note how black and dirty this rifle already is. The gunpowder I'm firing is a very high sulfur, it's called black powder. It's much dirtier than modern day gunpowder. What happens is, after a while, if this dirt gets into this hole, it's called the nipple. If the powder gets wet, it's very damp out. Anything that happens to stop the spark, this rifle's not going to fire. Quite often, soldiers in the heat of battle, after about 15-20 rounds, their rifles have become so dirty, they would not actually be firing. Notice how much smoke that one gunshot just produced. Multiply that by one division has 1,000 men. A corps may have up to 10 divisions. I'm rather sorry. A regiment is 1,000 men. A division has up to 10 regiments. A corps is going to have even more divisions. Imagine the amount of smoke and the noise. At Gettysburg, they found dozens, hundreds of soldiers, dead soldiers, with 6, 7 charges in their rifle. Apparently, in the heat of battle, they were just ramming stuff in there, pulling the trigger, and they never even realized they weren't shooting. Because every shot requires exactly this number of procedures, and it's a very slow process. Liam, look alive. Missed him.
Oh, now you about to shoot his son. Oh, damn. Oh,
You're
damn.
not loaded, son.
Oh, nah, chill. Don't be playing that shit over here. I don't play that. I don't play that. You know what I mean?
Also understand that some of
Stay
these
right
soldiers
there.
were afraid to fire.
You can afford to get shot. They play a game. Oh,
Afraid.
yo, he's
You gotta
not.
keep that in your mind as well.
Nah, it's the spark. He waiting for the spark. Not giving him a spark. Just look at it. You're gonna get. This is what?
Mini tools referred to as a nipple pick. Very simply,
When
it
you
was
look at it,
something
just look
you just
at it.
used to clean gunk out of your rifle. Soldiers quite often kept it in their pocket or up in their hat. Again,
I want to know where the bullet going. That's what I want to know.
this weapon is very large. It's large. It's also heavy. It weighs about 8 to 10 pounds.
Oh.
It takes a long time to fire. To give you an idea of the changes in weaponry and the effect on battle. Early on, if you do it in American history, when you study the battles between the settlers and the Indians, early on there was a fairly even fight. The settlers, even though they had the rifle, the Indians were more than a match for them with their arrows, as long as they're firing closer. Within 15 years after the Civil War, the Winchester Company develops the Winchester repeating rifle. Very different, very huge change, and it changes the course of warfare between the Americans and the Indians, and also for America in general. The rifle
That shit
is
man
shorter,
long.
much lighter. However, it fires a modern-day bullet with cleaner powder. The bullet is now encased in, to use the modern-day phrase, a full metal jacket, which means the powder's no longer getting wet. The bullet is traveling 3 times the speed. The bullet from my musket is traveling at about 800 feet per second. To put it in terms you can understand, a modern-day rifle like the M16, the bullet travels almost 2,000 feet per second. This is a very slow-moving bullet made of scrap, relatively soft lead, which is also why in the Civil War, 2/3, almost 3/4 of your deaths in the Civil War do not occur because of being shot on the battlefield. Most people die from infection after the battle. This bullet is going to be slow. It's going to enter your body. However, not unlike the modern bullet, it's not likely to leave your body. It's going to go in. The lead is going to shatter. It may shatter your bone, and that will tend to lead to infection. Doctors during the Civil War did not know what caused infection. They amputated. There was no way to remove the bullets. They just amputated the limb. The problem is they did not clean their instruments in between surgery. They did not know about that. This rifle is firing a bullet that's traveling at almost 1,200 feet per second. It has a range of over 1,000 yards, 3 times the range. Plus, my son can load 3 bullets, he can load 15 rounds inside of this rifle right there. All he has to do to fire is do that. Just shoot. Just shoot. And pull the trigger. That's all he's got to do. He can get off 15 shots at the same time I get 3. That's why once that rifle is invented, the balance of power
He getting too happy because that shit
and
really
the
come out.
American Indians or between
Nothing
the
in
US
there.
and the
I
Confederates.
don't trust
The first
nobody.
versions of these rifles will come out in 1864 by the Spencer Company. The Southerners, the Confederates, will refer to them as the rifle that you can shoot all day. They used to say that you could load it on the Sunday and you could keep firing until Tuesday, because you can have 15 rounds at a time. It's going to completely transform the nature of warfare in the future.
So now the bullet has become out of use.
He was having fun. He was
I'm not going to shoot anymore. What I've done here is set up again some of the basic camp accoutrements, also some modern day books about the Civil War, the time period that are available, novels. This one is actually a very famous, very popular book. It's written by an actual soldier after the Civil War called Hardtack and Coffee, in which he describes basically the actual camp life of the average soldier. The brogans, shaving stone, candles, the average soldier's toothbrush, pencils, very popular during the Civil War. Soldiers loved to write letters home and get letters from home. All the basic accoutrements of the Civil War. And then again, the average soldier, which is what myself and people like me try to portray, is to show what things were like for the average person fighting the war. Again, your textbooks focus on all the political and moral, philosophical questions. For the soldier in the field, if you read their diaries, the war is not quite so political and philosophical. It really comes down to a matter of surviving and fighting for the person next to you to make it back home when everything is said and done.
The other thing is, if you did decide to leave or desert because you were a coward, or you were just at it so long, or your nerves were shot from so many battles, it was very unusual to desert, though some did it, and Mr. Ridout will explain why.
Well, one problem with deserting back then, when you enlisted in the armies, you tended to enlist locally and serve locally. Every person who enlisted, for example, with the 124th New York State Volunteers, they came from Goshen, Montgomery, Newburgh, all the areas right up there, upstate New York. You enlisted with your local neighbors. You served in a local unit. Everybody knew you, and everybody in town would know that you enlisted. So if you deserted, you couldn't go back home, because everybody back home would know, wait a minute, you signed up with the 124th, the 124th is still out in service, why are you here? And you're not going to want to go back home and say, well, because I'm a coward. Desertion, therefore, was somewhat limited simply by the fact that to desert meant you had to go find some other place to live. It didn't stop people from doing it. There was a way, sometimes it was called honorable desertion. A lot of people deserted within the first months of joining. That is, they joined the army and then realized, gee, I don't like the food, and I don't like being yelled at and told what to do all the time, and I don't like spending 6-7 hours a day drilling, which is what you did. And they just up and walked out of camp. But once your army was in the battle, it was very unusual to really desert at that point, because there was a lot of social pressure against doing it. It was a very different army than it is today. Okay. At this point, I'd like to open up. Does anybody have questions for me about anything? I know I've thrown a lot of material, a lot of stuff at you. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Was there any type of draft?
There was a draft that was started at the end of 1862, actually 1863. Because initially a lot of people went to serve. It was glamorous, it was played up as something romantic. Very quickly though, when soldiers came back minus arms and legs, the romance died out. The draft was not always well received. In New York, for example, there were 3 days of riots in lower Manhattan because people resisted the draft. Also, a lot of, if you were wealthy, you could pay somebody to serve in your place. They did have to sometimes resort to a draft, because if your state or your local area could not meet its quota. New York, upstate New York, for example, they were given a quota of 1,000 men. So a man by the name of Colonel Van Horn Ellis, who had served with the 71st Militia, he rounded up everybody he knew. They rounded up their friends. They put together 1,000 men. If you could get 1,000 men, you could become, actually back then, you could become the colonel of your division, even if you had no prior military experience. Which is also one of the problems later on the battlefield. You had colonels, captains leading you into battle, whose major requirement is they were really popular at home. They just didn't know anything about fighting. But there was a draft from 1863 on. They did have to resort to a draft on occasion in the north. And in the south, they had to resort to
they had the draft too.
Yeah, to round it up, because soldiers didn't want to stay out and wanted to get back home in time for harvest. Yes, sir.
Other than the social pressure, were there any consequences to deserting?
Well, yeah, if you were caught deserting, you would be shot. If you were caught deserting, if you were caught as a deserter, you would be brought back to your unit and you would be executed in front of everybody. to kind of serve as an example. It is one of those weird statements where they will shoot somebody to try to try to stop the fear of being shot at.
Also, the life of the soldier was boring at times,
It was,
guys.
yeah, if you weren't in battle, the life of the soldier was if you read some of the diaries, you got up in the morning, you ate at breakfast at around, you drilled for the first couple of hours. Your day started about 4 or 5 in the morning. You drilled until 6 or 7. You had breakfast. You did some more drill. First, you drilled at the company level, then the division level, then platoon, company, division, brigade, and division, and you just kept repeating the same drills on much larger scales, and then you just kept repeating that. You stopped for lunch, you did some more in the afternoon, then you prepared for inspection, you had dress parade, which was basically line up all over again, then you had dinner, and that was your day.
And maybe that's why baseball was invented during the Civil War, if you guys aren't aware of that. That's where our national pastime began.
So that was the life of the soldier was fairly boring, aside from combat and marching.
Did you ever reenact at Bethpage?
Bethpage we haven't, just because we're from upstate, so to drive.
Bethpage has reenactments. They also reenact old-time baseball on Sundays during the summer. So if you ever wanted to go see what original baseball looked like, they do. They have league and everything there in Bethpage, Long Island.
We do most of our reenactments in Virginia, Pennsylvania. We reenact all the major battles: Antietam, Gettysburg, Chancellorsville, Brandy Station, which are in Virginia, Maryland. In those areas, we travel up and down the East Coast reenacting those battles. We do a major reenactment, living history, at our own home base up in Montgomery, where we've built log cabins and a bread oven, and we have a whole camp set up, and people come in and we show them camp life.
And so the people that engage in what Mr. Ridout is doing, you have to understand it's a very passionate hobby, if you will, but it's also just the fascination with the time period.
My wife uses the phrase insane.
Because it was such a unbelievable time in American history. The people were so honorable, faithful, courageous, and it was the time that defined our nation. And when you start delving into it and you learn about the people in the time period and how amazing it was, that's why so many books and so many movies and so much was written about this topic.
It was a very transforming time period. Anybody else have questions about Yes?
Do they really still use the drum, boys?
The drummers, yeah, that's my son's drum. He's a drummer. He has another year before he's legally allowed to have a musket. The drum and the bugle were used for your company calls. When you're in camp, the drum was like everything. There was reveille to get up in the morning. There was a drum call for breakfast, a drum call for dress parade, for drilling. Every time you heard the drum, mail call, all types of things. The drummer's job was to basically summon everybody together. What was called first call. That was your first notice that, okay, in a few minutes it's going to be an inspection or dress parade. So the drummer was constantly following the officers around to get out the information. Later on, it would sometimes be replaced by the bugle, but the drum was a much more common instrument. And on the battlefield, the same way. The drums were used to get the armies and the bugles to signal the armies march forward, retreat, or whatever. So yeah, the drum was a big part of it all.
My class, anybody that did not get their attendance taken,